Hi, everybody. My name is Victoria Alexander, and I'm the owner of Realty Collective, a real estate firm that I started 17 years ago to defy the stereotypes associated with real estate brokers here in New York City. I'm hopefully still doing that. I want to just go over a few housekeeping items before I introduce the team that will be going over selling in Brooklyn, a workshop for sellers considering selling their property right now. So the housekeeping items are: one, you can ask any questions you want. There is a chat at the bottom of the screen. Farah's going to put in a little message down there now so it pops up so you know where it's at. We're going to go through this process presentation, and then if we don't answer your questions during the presentation, we'll answer them at the end if they just aren't relevant for at the moment when we're going over something specifically. So don't worry, we will have time to go over your very specific questions. Second, we'll be sharing relevant links also in the chat for you to dig deeper into some of the topics that we do cover. So look out for those. You'll be emailed a recording of this class. You can share it with whoever you want. You'll be emailed a copy of our ebook, which is Selling into Brooklyn. That will go deeper into the selling process and have a lot more resources. Go ahead and share that around if you want. You can contact any of us after this to answer questions specifically if you're not comfortable asking them during the class. All of our contact information will be shared with you, and just reach out and we'll make sure, if you want to sell now or in 10 years, we're happy to chat with you no matter where you are in the process. And if you know a women-owned business here in Brooklyn that you would like to get some free press for, we have a women's business blog where we like to write about women-owned businesses here in Brooklyn and put them a little bit on a pedestal. We have great SEO. So if you would like to nominate somebody, please just send them on in as well. Farah will put a link to that in the chat also. And just so we're going to just kick things off, and introduce the team that's going to be doing this presentation. But again, I'm Victoria Alexander. Real estate brokers are basically your coach, your therapist, your sounding board, helping you through the emotional roller coaster of the New York City real estate market, especially selling a property. I want to introduce you to Christina Fallon, Tina Fallon, my right-hand person here at Realty Collective that does a majority of our representation of sellers, and Rashidah, Siddiqui, my personal lawyer who helped me buy my house over a decade ago. We're going on 12 years, and who I do a majority of our deals with. And I couldn't recommend these two women more to anybody. That these are my dream team. Tina helped me and convinced me to buy my house. I wasn't going to do it. I talk about it a lot in the Buying into Brooklyn class, how I even needed my own real estate broker to make this purchase, and how I'm so thankful that I had Tina and Rashidah by my side to guide me through it, because I always, I even thought I knew better because I am also real estate agent. So I should have had all the answers, but sometimes you just get in your own way. And thankfully, they made sure that I didn't do that. And I got to the finish line and bought my amazing house in Red Hook. So Rashidah, why don't you kick it off, and then Tina can take over.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rashidah Siddiqui. And as Victoria has said, I am a real estate attorney. I have been practicing for now 19 plus years. I represent lots of sellers in both, in all of the boroughs, and also in Long Island and in Westchester. We're here this afternoon to give you kind of like, as you start putting your property on the market, the things that you need to look out for as a seller. I'm licensed in both New York and New Jersey. And as I said, represent lots of clients that, started off as purchasers and now they're selling, or they're coming to me as a first-time seller as well. I'm looking forward to giving you valuable information. Go ahead, Tina.
Hi. So I'm Tina Fallon. I've been working with Victoria for 15 years maybe now. And I love doing this work. I love working with this team, and I love working with sellers. It's the most exciting transition in people's lives. It can be really terrifying, and it's a privilege to be a part of it. I think we're just going to jump into why you might be interested in selling right now. So it's right now, this very moment is a tough moment for sellers. The increase in interest rates has really had a chilling effect on the market, but that isn't a reason to hold on to your property. There's a lot of reasons why people might sell. So you're trading up to a bigger space, or maybe you're downsizing. You have a property that's in a high demand neighborhood. So if you're close to the park, if you have all of the amenities that people are looking for in, especially post-pandemic or kind of mid-pandemic, it doesn't matter how the market is, those properties are always going to be in demand. And if you're ready to move out of New York, we are seeing a lot of people transitioning right now from New York to other communities. We are very sorry to see you go, but if that's the life change that is happening to you right now, then oftentimes it makes sense to sell. All right, I think we're just going to go into the next sort of question about consideration. So when you're thinking about selling, there's two different things we want you to look at. One is that we want you to consider the market, which is what we're going to talk about a little bit here today. But we also really want to talk about what your personal needs are. So have you owned the property long enough to have reached your break-even horizon? So in New York, that's usually around 5 years. The cost of buying and the cost of selling real estate is quite high. And so sometimes even with the kind of record year-over-year increases in property values, it takes a little while for you to build enough equity that it makes sense for you to sell. That's something that you can talk about, obviously, with your accountant, you can talk about with your financial planner, but we're happy to talk about that too. But let's say you've owned the property long enough that that it makes sense for you to liquidate that asset now. And if that's something that you're ready to do, then this might be the right time for that. If you don't, if you're sort of on the fence, we're definitely not pushing people into selling right now. Although we're seeing that interest rates may go up a little bit more, we're being very tentative with our sellers at the moment, and we're really testing the market to make sure that we're going to get putting things on the market at the right time and at the right price. So if you are thinking about selling, we might discourage you from doing it, or we might not. Like, it really depends on you, your needs, and the property right now. And then the other considerations are really probably better for Rashidah to discuss, which have to do with those costs. So Rashidah, can you tell a little bit more about what the closing costs are and the tax implications also of selling?
Yeah. So one of the things in New York, I always say, if you're buying or selling, the state or the city is going to get their money. So one of the, in New York, you have both New York City transfer tax and New York State transfer tax. Depending on your selling price, the tax may vary. For New York State, it's always 0.4%. For New York City, it's either 1% or 1.425%. So those are your main two big items when people say, wait, what's this tax that I have to pay? And that's paid at closing. If you are also, maybe you've moved out of your property already and you've been renting it and you live in another state, or you use this as investment property, there's also what we call is the estimated New York State non-resident income tax that is also applicable, and that is 10.9%. And it's based on your profit and your sales price and your original purchase price. So those are things that you want to think about as well. If this was investment property and you're no longer in New York, and you're no longer considered a New York State resident. So those are your major taxes. There's also going to be your real estate commission. If you're paying off your mortgage, you want to make sure that you have that's there. If you are recording fees for recording the satisfaction. If you are selling a co-op, there may be a flip tax, and that varies depending on the co-op. And then there's miscellaneous fees such as your co-op transfer fee, or a move-out fee or move-in fee if it's a move-out fee if it's a condominium. But generally, those are your main items. So you have your transfer taxes, New York City, New York State. You have your real estate commission, paying off your mortgage, any recording fees. your legal, your attorney fee, and those are your main items. So you're generally looking at maybe between 6%. Well, let's say 8, because you have your, depending on your realtor commission. So you have your commission, so you have maybe 8 to 9% of just closing costs, aside from the New York State estimated income tax for non-residents. If it is investment, there's things that you want to consider, whether you can do a 1031 exchange, which is that you purchase it, you're selling investment property and you're going to purchase another investment property. And we can dive more in detail with that, because that's a specific kind of transaction and you want to make sure you have language in there. But it is something to think about, because you do have capital gains tax that you may have to pay. You don't pay that at closing, you pay that when you do your taxes. So people kind of forget about that kind of overarching thing that you may have to pay in a couple of months. If this was your primary residence, you do have an exemption of a certain amount. If it's an individual, it's $250,000. If it's 2 people, it's $500,000. If it's a married couple, $500,000 total. But definitely those are things you want to discuss with your attorney, with your accountant, with your agent, as you think about putting your property on the market, to make sure that you have enough to cover that and what type of profit that you're going to get and what expenses you're going to have to cover as well.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's amazing about that is that even after you factor in all of those expenses, that real estate, especially real estate, if you've held it for a reasonable amount of time, is still a really reliable wealth generator. And it's sometimes surprising to me even that that it works as well as it does, considering like that is like the city, the state, everybody wants a little piece of it, but you can still have a life-changing amount of money at the time when you sell. Or at the very least, you can still like get out with what you put into it.
Yes. Yes.
So, but I think one of the big considerations is not just what you need and what it's going to cost for you to sell, but also is your property what people are looking for? So the thing that is a big, one of the things that's happened that's really changed things in our business is that everybody is really shopping online. So the first place that people are going to encounter your home is on one of the real estate sites. So often StreetEasy or Trulia, or one of the other websites, Zillow, and a lot of people have preconceived notions about what it is that they're looking for. They're very specific, and they want to see photographs and descriptions that match what it is that they're looking for. And if you have something that everybody wants and you're reasonably priced, then chances are you're going to be able to sell your property pretty quickly. But those properties are sort of few and far between, the ones that are, the Goldilocks homes that are the best price and have everything everybody's looking for. So I think one of the things that we really do with our clients is we go through and say, okay, maybe this isn't what everybody's looking for, but it's going to be right for somebody. We market to that person. Or what can we do to your home to maybe move it a little bit more into the category of home that people are looking for. So I think that's one thing that we really want. And there's a lot that we can do. There's a lot that we can do to get your property where it needs to be so that people will be really responsive to it. And so don't just look around your house and say, oh gosh, it's messy. I don't want to move all of these things. I don't think I'll ever be able to sell it. Like, we can sell it. So we can all work together to make that happen. And then I think slide, maybe I've just skipped a slide. Oh no, so the other things that people are really looking for. So now that people are working from home, there's been a lot of moving into bigger properties. So larger homes with 2 or more bedrooms, particularly ones with 1.5 or more bathrooms, are selling much more quickly than small apartments right now. That's still true even as people have returned to work. And factors like outdoor space, proximity to parks and recreation, those things are more meaningful now than, say, proximity to the subway used to be, because people are spending more time at home and in their neighborhoods. Sometimes people are really buying for school district. We're limited as to how we can talk about that legally, but it is a factor for some people. And this is another thing that's been big since COVID. A lot of people got COVID pets. So if you have a pet-friendly home, a lot of people got COVID cars. So if you've got parking in your home, those are things that didn't used to have the kind of value that they have now. They really are. People will pay a premium for those over what they would have paid in the past. But then the next question is, I think we really talked about, we touched on a bit, and I'll throw back to Rashidah, is have you had your property long enough? So I think we covered a bit of this already, but I think this is a really important point, and I don't mind touching on it again.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, as I said, it's always good to kind of do a page of just what your closing costs are going to be, so you actually visually see it. My office, if a client calls and say, hey, Rashidah, I'm thinking of putting it on the market. This is what my potential selling price is going to be. What are my closing costs? So then we can tell you, okay, your New York City transfer tax is going to be 1% or 1.425%. Your New York State is going to be 0.4%. Do your mortgage, do you have multiple mortgages on the property? You can preliminary get a payoff from your lender to see approximately what you're going to have to pay off at the end of the day. Your realtor commission. And as a capital gains are things that you want to think about for the future that you don't have to pay at closing, but it is a consideration that you want to take into account when you're doing that. Because I tell clients, you get this big check at the closing, you speak to your accountant, you want to put aside of that, because Uncle Sam, when you're doing your taxes, is going to come and knock it and say, hey, did the bank attorney they sent that 1099 to us to let us know that you sold the property, and then you've already spent your money, and now you have this tax bill that you have to pay. But you also, as I said, you have that exemption if it was your primary of $250,000. If it's a joint couple, it's $500,000. And if this was investment property, even if you originally started off as your primary residence, and maybe you decided it's a condo and you decided to sublet it, or it's a two-family and you lived in one and you rented out the other unit, you can speak with your accountant and with your attorney on ways to minimize your capital gains and potentially do what we call as a 1031 exchange, which is investment property to investment property, and minimizing those capital gains. But yeah, it's that typically around 8% is your closing cost. 7 to 8% is going to be your closing costs, aside from your mortgage payoff, which is, as I said, paying off your loans on that. And if it's a co-op, always want to double check. Does your co-op have a flip tax? I've seen some condominiums have what we call is similar to flip taxes or an option. So you always want to speak with your management company. Some co-ops is based on the percentage of your sales price. Some is based on the number of shares you own. But once again, it's something that you want to make sure that you understand when you calculating your cost for selling your property.
Rashidah, just a quick point of clarification. So when you say that the exemption is $250,000 for an individual or $500,000 for a couple, that's of the profit, right? That's
correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And they don't take into consideration your mortgage. So for instance, they'll look at what you original purchase price, your closing costs from your purchase, any capital improvements you did to the property. Then they'll look at your selling price and your closing costs from your sale. And that, once you do those two numbers, minus, et cetera, they'll see where your profit is from there. And that's where your tax is going to be based off for your that exemption applies. So if it comes out, you've made 500,000, 250,000 based on all of those calculations, and you have a 250,000 exemption, there's no capital gains there.
Right. It's just that alone is one of the reasons why real estate is a pretty sound investment for people. So that $250,000 that you are exempted is very rare in the world of any kind of you don't get that exemption if you're selling stock. So, and then the other thing that I think is really crucial and that we love talking about with people, this is actually where I start with people a lot, is do you have a plan for after you sell? So a lot of people feel like when they decide they're going to sell, that they're just getting on a conveyor belt and they're going to have a certain kind of experience and there's nothing they can do to change that. And that's simply not the case. If you start from what your plan is after you sell, we can build a sales platform around that can support your plans for the future. So if your plan is that I really need to sell because I want to buy something that's bigger, or I'm selling because I'm going to downsize, and you know you're going to buy and sell in the same market and that you're going to stay in New York, for example, that's something that we would treat very differently from somebody who is already living out of state and is selling this home because they don't want to be a landlord anymore. Or if you just inherited this house from a relative and you don't need it as a place to live and you don't want to become a landlord. So all of those things are factors that we take into consideration when we're building sort of backfilling what your process is going to be. And timeline is a big piece of this too. Rashidah, I think you can talk a lot about timeline.
Yeah,
How much time people need.
Exactly. It moves pretty quickly when you get into contract. So always that's something you definitely want to have an understanding of when you're putting your property on the market. In New York, once you enter into contract, if you're selling a house, your closing date is typically on or about 60 days. And the same thing for a condominium. And if it's a co-op, it's on or about 60 days, but typically it's roughly a 90-day time period for a co-op. But you have to, when you're closing, you're turning over your keys on the day of the closing. So people have to understand that what's your, are you ready to move in the next 60 days? Are you ready to move in the next 90 days? Have you figured out where you're going to be moving? Because unless you have, if there's other circumstances, you need to have a conversation with your attorney, with your realtor, so that we can put in provisions in the contract, whether you need what we call as post-possession. But majority of the time, a buyer wants the keys on the day of the closing. So they really want you to be out, property delivered, vacant, and broom cleaned within that time period, which is that 60 to 90-day period, depending on whether it's a co-op, a house, or a condominium. So that's really a rough, and that time period goes pretty quickly once your offer is accepted. So definitely you want to, it's, people really adhere to that time period when you're going into contract. And if it needs a longer time period, then you can adjust the contract for that. And you can have that conversation when you accept an offer that, hey, we need a longer time period to close. We may need a longer post-possession period. So your attorney and your realtor know how to make sure that you're protected in the contract of sale.
Yeah, that's something that we feel like it's very important to be transparent with buyers about. If you're going to need to stay 6 months in the property, but you want to put it on the market now because it's summertime and you have a beautiful backyard, that's something we really need to be upfront with people about, because this is their hopes and dreams too. And we definitely want somebody whose timeline intersects with your timeline in a way that is mutually acceptable for everybody. So and that's something that, just be honest with us about that too, is that because once you're in contract, it goes so quickly, we want to give you the benefit of time before you put your property on the market. So for example, I have a client right now who I first visited their property a year ago. They were thinking about selling. Then this summer they said, we're definitely ready to sell because we have an accepted offer on another place. But we got to September and they said, actually, you know what, the closing for that one has dragged out and we're not going to be able to move in there. So we're not going to put this place on the market until the spring. And that is great. That's fine with us. We can adjust to your timetable. And the good news for them is they hadn't already put it on the market. So you're not disappointing somebody, and they're not also having to move out and into an Airbnb and maintain 2 different households while they're waiting for the other property to close. So, and if you feel like your situation is unusual, please know everybody's situation is unusual. And we've got methods for dealing with anything that you've got going on. So let's say after all of these things, you still are interested in selling. Like, why would you still want to sell? No, you're still ready to sell. Once you have really made this decision, then it's time to assemble your team. So team for selling is similar to your team for buying. You absolutely need a brilliant real estate attorney. That real estate attorney needs to be a New York City real estate attorney if you're selling in New York. We have a very strange ecosystem, and a New York City real estate attorney, not your friend, not your uncle. Your New York City real estate attorney is the person who you really want on your side. And then obviously you're going to have a real estate broker unless you decide you want to do for sale by owner, which is always an option if you don't have another job and you would like to do, my job, you can do that. But what you can't do is be your own real estate attorney. You absolutely need a real estate attorney on your team. So interview people. We have great lists of questions to ask. Ask your friends if they've had a really good experience. If you're in a building where a lot of other property has been sold by a real estate agent, talk to the real estate agent who's done a lot in your building, but make sure you talk to other people as well. So give yourself time to really interview these people because they're going to be handling this enormous financial transaction for you and also this really emotional transition. So you want people you trust, you want people you like, you want people who, when their name comes up in your phone, you don't go, oh God. So so I think that's a really important part of it too. So make sure you give yourself enough time to assemble a team that you trust and who understand what your situation is and who are super respectful of your needs. I think that's the other thing too. Don't let anybody tell you that there's only one way of doing this. Your way we'll find a way to work it for you. And then what we need to know. So everybody, you need to know what your property type is. Everybody needs to know what it is that you are actually selling. So sometimes you get places where people have lived in something for so long and they don't even understand that it was actually a legal 2-family and they've been using it as a single family for their whole ownership period. Like Rashidah, can you talk through a little bit about what those?
Yeah, I think just as you think about selling, I always, one thing that's just a great kind of tip, if you have the copies of the documents from when you purchased your property, that's always good to have handy. The deed, your attorney can always look up. If it's a co-op, then they can get copies of your stock certificate if you have it, or contact your lender if there's a mortgage on the property. But you want to have the information from when you purchase the property because that helps you when you sell it. Because if something comes up, there's always, hey, what is there the title report from when you purchased it? Is there the certificate of occupancy from when you purchased it? Is there, the owner's policy or a survey if this is a house? Things that you want to also preliminary your attorney can do or you can do is look up to see if there's any violations on your property. When you, since your ownership, did you do any work? Did you hire a contractor? Did you convert it from a 1-bedroom to a 2-bedroom? Did you get alterations done approved by the co-op or the condominium? Did you add a deck? Did you add, these things that you want to make sure that you got the appropriate permits and they were also closed out because these are things that your buyer is going to do. Their attorney is going to do a search on the premises to make sure all of this is closed out. So the more information that you have at the beginning and have it ready to go, when you go into contract, when they do the title, when they're looking for certain items, you have it, it eases up and it makes the transaction go a lot smoother. So I always say, look up to see if there's any judgments or violations on the property. Alterations, make sure you have all of the paperwork from that. You can look up to make sure that it's all been signed off. Your mortgage, if you refinance, do you have the paperwork from that? Do you have, was the satisfaction recorded? If it wasn't, at least you have the documentation so your attorney can kind of go back into time and track down the title company or the attorney for the bank that was supposed to record the satisfaction to make sure these things are taken care of. So all of that is information that you need to have for as far as the legal framework of the property is concerned.
Yeah, and if that sounds like an enormous amount of homework, and that's one of the reasons why we definitely want to front load all of that before you put the listing on the market, because the big deal killer in whether you're selling or whether you're buying is time. Once you've accepted an offer, before you even get to that contract, you have maybe 2 weeks at the outside to get people to keep that deal together. And so sometimes people want to sign a contract within 7 days. And that's possible if everybody is ready, if you have all of your documentation together. And what you don't want to do is sort of drag that out, lose the buyer, have to go back on the market. Your backup buyer has already gone. And you're like, I'm so sorry. We just realized that we needed to get this document and we didn't have it. As much as we can do that homework ahead of time. Obviously, things are going to come up during that period of time. We'll roll with it. But the more you can be prepared going into it, just the easier it's going to be for you too. When your accountant says, where's that piece of paper, you're going to have it. So that's good too. And then as far as, selecting a team, I think what you're really looking for is somebody who is going to be the best representative for your property that you can find. So sometimes that is like you're in a big building and there's a real estate agent who sells to every unit in that building. Sometimes that's the right person, as we were saying. Or if you live in a small neighborhood and there's a local neighborhood brokerage that really knows everybody, that can be the right place to go. Or sometimes you want to just go with somebody, you want to support a small business, or you want somebody with a really snappy website, or whatever it is that you feel like you need to put your property forward. That's something that I think is important to take into consideration. We are a really small company. We don't have shareholders. Our clients we have our fiduciary responsibility is to our clients, not to our shareholders. And so I really like working for a small company. Sometimes people like working with big companies. That's entirely up to you. But make sure that you take time, you interview, and you ask people, get your friends involved and see who they've liked working with. That's also really fun. And if you're looking for, and be really honest about what you need with your attorney and with your real estate broker. If you say like, you know what, I need a lot of attention. I'm going to be on the phone with you 5 times a day, or I have this very complicated situation and I'm going to need you to help me through every step of it. Be honest about that. You want somebody whose practice can accommodate that, because you don't want to find yourself weeks into this process feeling like, you know what, I feel like I'm being ignored. And on the other side of you have a real estate attorney who's just like, I can't believe that person is still calling me. So you want to make sure you get a good fit in that way. And then we're talking now just about soliciting buyers. So once you've determined who your team is, you've got all of your paperwork together, and it is time for you to put the property on the market. We like to think about this in terms of soliciting buyers. It's not just marketing your home. We're really reaching out and saying, who is the buyer for this home? And the buyer for this home is frequently somebody who is just like you, but maybe a few years ago, but with a lot more money. So that's really who you're generally selling to, somebody who kind of resonates with the soul of your property. And so we want to be really clear every step of the way that we're telling a consistent story about your home. And some parts of that story include, we're going to have to stay in here for 6 months. We won't be able to close until January 1st. Those are part of the story too. But we want to make sure that all of your marketing material, the language around it, and the outreach around it tells a coherent story about your home, because that's really what this is. Like, we want to make sure that when the right buyer walks into your house, walks into your apartment, they just look around and they're like, oh yes, this is the place for me. And so our job is really to find those people. And so there's a lot of different things that people will say. It's just like, oh, and then you underprice it and you'll get 100 people through at your open house, and then it's just going to be a bidding war. And then and if that's an experience that you want to have, that's an experience that you're permitted to have. It might backfire right now because this market is really confusing, but we tend to be a little bit more precise in our outreach. We like to price a little bit closer to where we think the property is going to sell, because we don't want a bunch of people coming in whose limit is $9.99 and you're only going to sell for 1.2. You've just wasted their time, because you're just using them as fodder to get your price up. I think there's other better ways to get you to the 1.2 than by underpricing your home, which, as we were saying, can backfire. Anyway, I can go on about this forever because it's my passion. So I'll lay off a little bit. I just think it's important to find the right broker who can tell the story of your home to the people who are going to buy it. And you really only need one buyer. I mean, I think sometimes people are like, oh, I had 10 offers. Oh, I had 12 offers. It doesn't matter. If those offers are not the best offers you could possibly get, it doesn't matter how many of them there are. So, and then to that end, one of the things that we just want to point out is staging. So staging a home can feel really, can feel overwhelming, in part because you talk to people and they're like, yeah, we'll stage your home and it's going to cost $10,000. The way our company works, we do a lot of work with people's own homes. We also have a full inventory of staging materials. And the way we work with our folks is, for the most part, is that we can stage your home and that any costs associated with that can be paid at closing. We know that generally when you're selling a home, you're not feeling especially cash rich. So we really want to make staging achievable for people because it makes a big difference. As you were saying, people shop online, they look at those photos and they just want it to be perfect. And so staging a home is what people do to make it line up with the picture that people have in their heads of what their next home is going to be. So we spend a lot of time with buyers. We know what they're looking for, and we can make your house look like what they're looking for. All right, considering offers. Really importantly, so once we've got everybody together, we've got your offers, and there's so many different things to take into consideration. One is that even if you get a lowball offer, we recommend that you counter that offer. So we really want to negotiate every single offer that you get to get it to its highest possible number and its best possible terms. So just because something comes in low the first time, that doesn't mean you should just be like, oh, well, those people are dead to me. It can be really tempting to just walk away from a lowball offer. But sometimes that's just somebody who's gotten bad advice and they were told they should start really low, or it's just somebody who needs to make sure that they couldn't have gotten it for a lower price. So always counter those offers, even when they come in low and you feel a little insulted by them. And also along those same lines, take the first offer seriously. So people who have been in the market for a long time have been outbid on other properties. They're super qualified. They are ready to go and they're anxious about this process. They'll often be the first people through the door. And sometimes their broker will call and be like, can we get in before the open house? Like those people, take them seriously. And sometimes the first offer will come in at the asking price and you're like, oh man, we should have priced it higher. But oftentimes that's because that first buyer is the most motivated buyer, and it can be tempting to walk away from those folks too. Please take those people seriously. And then putting COVID concerns into a contract as we head into the fall and everybody is unmasked again. You definitely want to make sure you're careful, and I'll throw this to you, Rashidah, too. There's a lot of different things that we want to do when we're considering offers, but making sure we're not caught flat-footed by this pandemic is something that we should be pretty good at now that we're almost 3 years into it.
Yeah, I think we've adjusted a lot with the way we're able to do closings in the worst case scenario, contract signing and things like that. Now we've had, learned from previous. So most contracts have that. The contract itself can be signed electronically. We have in there, potential if you need to do remote closings. Most closings now are back in person. But as you mentioned, if it the winter time comes, we'll see how things go. But majority of the closings now, and they still have to be with original signatures. So as a seller, you can't sign your deed or you can't sign the transfer tax documents electronically. So in those situations, also if a client is no longer in New York State, you want to think about doing power of attorneys. You're giving that to your attorney. So have kind of conversations with your attorney on what is going to be needed at when you're going into contract for signing, and then what you're going to be needing in time for the closing. But I think we have the main kind of like paragraphs that have contract provisions that have survived are really these electronic closings, and that if some the parties will agree to work around scheduling if there's a situation where it's due to COVID and adjournments of closing and things like that.
Yeah, and I think one other thing that I just kind of skipped over before this is, as we were talking about, making sure you've got all your documentation together. Like if there's anything, like if you have an appliance that's not working, or if you have something that you know is going to come up in an inspection, make sure we know about it ahead of time, because you can't count on an inspector to just miss something. They're paying attention to everything. And if we know that there are any issues that are going to come up, if there's if you have a tenant in place and it's going to take a little while to get those people out, make sure that we know everything ahead of time, so that we can keep all of that information flowing to the other agent and to the buyer, so that they can process that information and we don't slow down our deal. Because as we said, biggest deal killer is time. All right, so what are the documents you need in order to get into contract?
Mm-hmm. So when I start representing the seller, I send them 3 items. Typically, I said, send me a copy of your stock certificate and lease. If it's a co-op, the deed I can always pull from the city's website. So I don't really need that if it's a house or a condo. But if it's a co-op, I definitely need you to send me your copy of your stock certificate. The lease, not so much, but if you do have the lease, that's great. If you have a mortgage on the property, you probably just have the copy. If you don't have the mortgage, then I want to make sure that you have the original documents, because if you don't have the original documents, that can be something that you have to have a conversation with your attorney on what's going to be necessary in order for you to close, because your original stock and lease is what's needed if you're selling a co-op. For a condo or a house, as I said, the deed original, you don't need that for the closing, because the title company, they do searches and they make sure that the original documents were recorded, and that's all that's needed. Your attorney can pull and get a copy of the deeds to make sure that the names are spelled correctly. Were you married at the time that's on your deed? So it has your maiden name and not your married name. So those are the things that you want to make sure that it matches. Did you add anyone to the deed? Did you take somebody off of the deed? Those are things that you want to make sure that you have, because the contract has to match what's on the deed and what's on the stock certificate and lease. And if you have a condo or a house, you got what we call as a owner's policy when you purchase the property. Always great if you have that, because if there's a title issue that comes up when you're in contract, if you have this insurance policy, it's very easily able to remedy that title issue. If there's an open mortgage that wasn't recorded when you bought the property, that title policy gets it cleared up really quickly. So always good if you have a copy of your owner's policy. If it's a house, do you have a copy of the survey? Because the buyer is going to need to, their bank is going to want a survey of the property. Did you add a deck? Was that on the survey? If you didn't, so you want to give your attorney a copy of the survey. And as I had mentioned earlier, just pull in the property to see if there's any violations, Department of Buildings, HPD violations, sidewalk violations sometimes come up. A lot of times people I think in the mid 2000s, early 2000s, they were buying properties and didn't care that there was open permits or sidewalk violations because they got a credit at closing. And now you're looking to sell it and you never followed up to, hey, I got this $5,000 credit at closing, but I never did anything after that. And now I have to sell it. It's still on your property. What happens? You have to make sure either you tell the buyer upfront, hey, there's this violation. I bought it with it. There's this deck. I bought it with it. And we can plan that way, but always good to have this information, because once again, more information you have upfront, the easier it is for your attorney to hopefully remedy, for your realtors to hopefully address with the buyers, so the deal doesn't kill the deal or make it a longer time period for closing. For due diligence as a seller, things that you want to get prepared and ready to go, your offering plan, if it's a co-op or a condominium, house rules, financials. It's always good to have that right up front so that the buyer's attorney can go right in with all of this information. I have one right now and it's been a week and a half. I'm still waiting on the seller side to send me documents because they didn't have all of this. And it's, as a buyer, I'm like, these are things you should have ready as a seller so that your potential buyer attorney can get right in there and do that due diligence. So it doesn't, once again, time is going along, the buyer's looking at something else, what's going on, why are they giving me information? And it's not that they don't have the information, is that they just started gathering it once the offer was put, the deal sheet was sent out, which kills time.
Yeah, you're actually reminding me about some work I have to do, some homework I have to do on a co-op that we're bringing to market next month. So this is actually really helpful for me as well. So a lot of this I know we're talking about is like very kind of like we're talking about technical things. We're not talking about the excitement of choosing a buyer, which can be really exciting. So these are all the things that you want to have together when you are taking a lot of these offers into consideration. So considering offers, you've got all of your paperwork together. You get a chance to view some of their paperwork. So when people submit offers, they also submit their pre-approval forms from their banks, and they also submit, depending on how diligent we're being, definitely in a co-op, we have them submit a financial disclosure form where they tell a little bit about where their money is coming from. We know where we know where they work. We know, and they often include a cover letter that tells us a little bit more about them. And somebody who's like, I've lived in a co-op in New York City my whole life, I will only live in a co-op, I want to buy your co-op, that person might be a little bit more willing to roll with the paperwork involved in buying a co-op than somebody who, say, is like a foreign buyer who sees this as a good investment. So we evaluate each of those offers, and we go through all of them. It's not just about the highest number. It really is about a combination of the right number and the right terms that the people are offering. So if you really need to stay in the home for 6 months and somebody's offering you $50,000 more if you vacate in 60 days, is it worth it to you to move a little bit more quickly for that $50,000? Well, that's something that you can take into consideration when you have those offers in front of you. So, we will roll with all of that as it goes through. So in terms of our contracting, we're just talking about those due diligence documents. We talked a bit about COVID-19, but we have this offer accepted, and then we put it together a deal sheet that has all the agreed upon terms and the contact information for everybody. We submit it to both of the attorneys, the sell side and the buy side, and then we hand it over to Rashidah. And what do you do then, Rashidah?
So we take that deal sheet and we put it together, the contract of sale. And typically you'll have your form contract of sale, and then you'll have what we call as a seller's rider, which additional provisions that have things that protect you and some disclosures in regard to the purchaser side. And then we'll have the purchaser side, we'll send over what we call as a purchaser's rider with additional provisions of, there hasn't been any leaks in the unit in the past 12 months. There hasn't been any bed bug issues. You're not in litigation, you're not in bankruptcy, just additional representations that you will make in the contract of sale. Your attorney will go over these representations with you prior to you signing. Logistically, the seller signs first, gives the down payment, and then you'll sign it after they sign, and your attorney has the down payment. The down payment is held in escrow by your attorney. That's why it's important that you have a real estate attorney in New York, because it has to be put in an escrow account. And we have we pay a lot for insurance to make sure that your attorney doesn't run away with the funds. So I said, make sure it's a real estate attorney and they are licensed and they have an escrow account in New York. So that money is held in escrow by your attorney until the closing. At the closing, that's when you receive your funds. So time periods, as I said, you have on or about 60 days to close. If it's a co-op or a house, on or about 90 days. If it's a condo or a house, on or about 90 days. If it's a co-op. In the background, as a seller, you don't have much to do. you're kind of waiting for the buyer side to get their mortgage, to get the application into the co-op. So there's maybe a few documents that you have to do, but your main during this time period is getting ready to vacate the premises in time for the closing.
Yeah, and that's something that you should begin with, like, is like you get that signed contract, because remember, your buyer can walk away at any time until you have a fully executed contract. So you get that signed contract, that money is in the escrow account, and now you're pretty certain that this deal is going to close. Then you really should give yourself like one night off to toast your victory, and then get ready to move, because it does take a long time to get all of your stuff moved out of your home. We know it's a nightmare and people really hate moving. It's one of the reasons they don't sell property, is because they don't want to go through the process of moving. But we're happy to work with you to make that as seamless as possible. We have a lot of techniques that we have, like coping mechanisms for helping people move more peacefully, we'll just say. And then the other thing is that, like, when you start moving stuff around, you might also like bust a corner of like your drywall, or you realize like, oops, that lighting fixture that was working at the inspection isn't working now. So sometimes those things come up where you really need to make sure that you've got your space cleaned up, you've got everything is in working order. And then when you do vacate the premises prior to the final walkthrough, everything, you can't have well, it depends on what it says in the contract, but generally speaking, you can't have holes in the wall that are bigger than a dime. All of the rooms need to be broom swept. And we generally like to make sure that everything is really quite clean for the buyers, because it makes it much easier at the closing table. So, you know, you've gotten you don't forget to take your food out of the refrigerator. There's little things that people forget, and at the last minute, you're just shoving stuff into trash bags and putting it in the hallway. And we're there to help you. Sometimes we're the ones putting the trash in the hallway. So, but make sure you give yourself enough time to move that it doesn't become more stressful than it needs to be.
And yeah, with just timing wise as well, scheduling the closing, if you're you have an idea of when things are progressing. So you'll know that your buyer got the mortgage commitment. You'll know that, okay, their bank clearance is expected this week. And you'll have that discussion with the attorney. Okay, I'm available on these certain days. Typically, once your buyer has the clearance to close, it takes about a week to 2 weeks to schedule the closing. Sometimes it could be done with less time, but just the logistics of what has to happen at the closing and the paperwork that has to get prepared, you typically have about a week to 2 weeks. And that should give you enough time also to just kind of get those last items and make sure your attorney is going to say, hey, when are you planning on vacating? Hey, Rashidah, I'm planning on moving out this weekend. I'm going to be available to close after the 19th of the month. So now your attorney knows this is your time frame for scheduling the closing. So then when they're working with the other parties, if you're not going to be at the closing, okay, I'm leaving the state, I need to give you power of attorney, have that done prior so you don't have to attend the closing. Some sellers like to attend the closing. Realistically, as a seller, your part is probably 15 to 20 minutes of signing documents, and then you're sitting there watching the buyer sign the rest of the documents, and you're waiting for your check. So it's nice to be there and hand over the keys and, you know, make this a complete 360 transaction. But sometimes, you know, scheduling, your schedule doesn't work, you're not in New York, et cetera. You can do power of attorneys and give that over to your attorney, or you can pre-sign some of the documents in advance with your attorney and then give them a limited power of attorney as well. But always walk through vacating the premises. You want to make sure keys are at the closing. That walkthrough goes through because you don't want to have something that breaks or an appliance that's not working that's supposed to be working, and now you have to give the buyer additional money, or you're negotiating, escrows and things that have to happen. That makes the kind of end a little bit less, comfortable or more overwhelming than it needed to be.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's just, this is a big emotional process, right? Like letting go of a home, even a home you haven't lived in for that long, can be surprisingly emotional. And even if you're transitioning into something that's bigger and better, then it's weird to let go of your home. So we're here to try to make the other things that are stressful about that process a little bit easier, so that you can get through, as Rashidah was saying, that 360-degree shift as seamlessly as possible. I think that's about it. I think that, like, it ends with a giant check.
Yeah, it ends with you getting that check. If you're not at the closing, your attorney will deposit it into your account or wire it into your account or overnight it to you. But yeah, so the closing itself is roughly about 15 to 20 minutes on the seller side of signing a few documents and then waiting for the buyer to finish up their signing of their documents. Closes are typically an hour and a half to 2 hours. Sometimes they're a little bit longer depending on the bank. But turning over the keys and, getting that check, you turn over your keys to the buyer and the buyer gives you that big check that you happily will receive. Okay.
So I don't think we
really
have any
great, ladies.
questions. Oh, thanks. I don't think we have any questions in the chat.
No, I don't see anything either. Thanks everybody for participating, but
Yeah.
it's been quiet in this chat. So I think that we're just going to wrap everything up by saying, look out for our email with all of those useful resources that we have outlined at the beginning of the class, the handbook, our contact information, a copy of this video. Go ahead and share it out with whoever you feel would benefit from it. And again, our contact information will be in those emails as well. And you can reach out to us to set up a personal call to talk about your specific scenario at any point. And thanks everybody so much for sharing your Thursday afternoon with us.
Yeah, good luck. Good luck.
Thank you. Have a good one, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye.